Good afternoon and welcome to the CERIAS Security Seminar from Purdue University. Our speakers today are CERIAS Professor Barrett Caldwell from Industrial Engineering and his PhD student Omar Eldardiry. They work in the area of human factors as it relates to team interaction and information display in network operations centers and security operations centers and so on, including NASA, just about any sort of large display of information, different sources, and so on. So that's the subject of our talk today. Professor Caldwell.
Thank you. So thank you for having us today. This is actually one of those just-in-time sonar presentations. We finished the slides about 3:05 this afternoon. So one of the things that I want to talk about, as Randy highlighted, is the role of human factors as an important element in team performance in highly engineered settings, including rich information settings such as mission control, hospital management, infrastructure management for the grid, and I've talked to several of you about some of these ideas. So our presentation today is going to highlight some of the work that we've been doing this past year in the area of information presentation and team coordination for network operations centers and security operations centers. One of the things that's been very, very recently popular, both from a research perspective but also from an operations perspective, is the role of human factors in cybersecurity. And people are now talking about cybersecurity as an area for human factors engineers, cognitive scientists to be involved in, not just in terms of examining the role of threat vectors or something like that, but also the performance of people who are managing an operations center and how do they effectively do their job in what's a complex information environment that includes both physical operations and physical resources as well as electronic cyber operations, which may or may not map onto the physical world the same way. So when we started this project, actually started writing up the ideas about a year ago, one of the discussions that we had with Gene Spafford was, how do we bring this other aspect of the security landscape into discussing how we could do better at security operations, and how do we manage a wider range of improving the tools that analysts and team leads have available. So that's really the fundamental emphasis for this project is how do we improve information and awareness for task coordination and analyst performance. Basically, this little cartoon that we have is just a thought exercise of the way that a network operations analyst thinks about their work. And this is from an interview we did at the RSA conference back in February in San Francisco. So just as a memento, I made sure that I wore the RSA tag so that you would remember what my name was. So what we can see in this sort of environment is that there's a variety of things going on between the different tools, teams, managing the infrastructure, both the physical infrastructure over here in computers, but also talking about the internet in its very generic state. And one of the really significant concerns is that this is not a uniform organization. It's not like everybody has the same sort of organization of network operations or security operations centers. We're going to call them NOCs and SOCs because that's what a lot of people call them. So some organizations integrate the network operations and the security operations side. Some have distinct teams. Some major corporations that Omar and I have been dealing with actually don't even have dedicated staff for these operations at all. And so there's a wide range of capability for being able to know what's going on in your center, what's going on in your physical and cyber network. Obviously, there's a lot of emphasis for many people on intrusions, exploits, the behavior of bad guys. And there's no lack of these sorts of discussions about exploits. It seems like every time I turn around, there's some other thing in the newspaper about it. Many of you are aware of, and I hope not too many of you got caught in the air traffic snarls in Chicago a few weeks ago when there was a fire that took out basically most of the Chicago air traffic capability. That seemed to be an arson event. That's someone attacking the physical infrastructure. And in essence, the cyber infrastructure is sort of an extra casualty, right? As opposed to when you're looking at retailer credit systems, nobody's going in and trying to do something damaging to an actual store, but the security breaches are directly focused on that physical infrastructure. The cyber infrastructure. The same is true for like the ISPs. And every time I think that I've gotten a list of the credit breaches, I have to keep adding a new one. So that's why you see the dots on the end, because like, yep, I was up to date, and then they added Staples, and then there's probably another one. I'm not going to talk about that. And part of the reason why I'm going to talk about that, not going to talk about that, is that when you look at the range of SOC events and NOC degradation, it's not just about bad guys. It's not just about explicit intentional evil. Okay, but if you look at the IU student records problem down in Bloomington earlier this year, it was a security patch that didn't get implemented correctly, or the patch itself was not functional for that system, and it left a vulnerability that someone, in essence, accidentally published. So that someone doesn't think that I'm just bashing on IU, I also get to have a Purdue bad day. Last fall, we had a set of tornadoes that came through the state of Indiana and basically damaged a number of buildings that had network operation centers in them, as well as power outages. So not just Purdue, but a number of facilities throughout northern and central Indiana and ended up losing their capabilities due to just a storm taking out the grid, the building, water pouring in. It's bad. Okay. Really bad days happen when scuba divers come across a fiber optics line and cut it. And that can take out international traffic, and that can make for a very, very bad day. That happened in March of 13. And the United Airlines breakdown a couple of years ago now was not an intentional intrusion, but basically a computer system breakdown, because these are physical as well as electronic objects. So as we were able to talk about the variety of vulnerabilities, rather than just talking about intrusions, when we were able to talk about the tasks that operators need to do and analysts need to understand about their networks, and what we started to find out is how few analysts actually had good access to tools. And the tools that they were looking for were tools that helped them understand what was going on as well as tools that would help them explain to the rest of the organization what their role is, especially if you are team lead for a SOC and you're spending a fair amount of money on hardware and software and all these things, and you're spending, what, $3,000 a pop to go to RSA, and you're taking your 10-person team, you would really want to be able to talk to the rest of the organization about what that buys you. Okay, but there were gaps in the ability to be able to communicate to others in the organization about what it is that the SOC is providing for the organization and what the members of the team are able to do to improve their value. Okay, so I think this finally came down to us as a critical recognition that in and of itself, lack of awareness, lack of alignment, lack of knowledge of the team performance status of your operations center and the people in it, that by itself is a vulnerability, because you don't know what your current state is. And if you don't know what your current state is, you can't effectively prepare or respond or communicate to other people what your state is and what you should do about it. Okay? And we saw two different gaps, two different vulnerabilities. Lower tier analysts, basically the novices that come in and they're given usually some sort of incident response or something like that responsibility. Their performance is bounded by the usability of the incident monitoring tools they have. Many of these tools, and you've probably seen them, they are just continuing scrolling screens of text and numbers that you just watch go by. And if I wanted to put you to sleep, that would be the way to do it, to show you a whole bunch of numbers and letters that don't have implicit meaning to you, and you're trying to make sense of them, and the things that are highlighted are not highlighted in terms of this is about to be a bad day. They're highlighted in terms of, yes, I already know what that is. Okay? That's what the Tier 1 operators have. The Tier 2 analysts, their performance is bounded by two things, two distinct things. One is how many complex events need to get escalated to them versus they can delegate tasks to the Tier 1 analyst. And the Tier 2 analyst, the team lead, the senior analyst, has to also be able to communicate to the rest of the organization about the performance of the SOC. They don't have good metrics to talk about that performance to others in the organization. And so these are real challenges. So our project goal and our system description is to start to improve the information and awareness for task coordination and analyst performance. And we would like to be able to provide alignment across multiple visualization contexts and multiple timescales. And I really want to thank Mike Murray. Michael was one of the people that we met for our first round of interviews at RSA. And he was actually making this presentation about this is a really hard job, and what we do is really important, but we need to be able to explain to people what it is that we do. And so you can think about two different dimensions, actually two or three different dimensions. One is whether or not an organization has a primarily proactive stance. They go out and chase things down before they happen, or a primarily reactive stance, whether or not they wait until it's already happened and then they jump into action. The other one is one that we'll talk about in terms of technical spectrum. So the least technical is basically the security awareness. You know, when you send out those anti-phishing emails, don't click on that. You're not actually responding to anything specific. You are doing a broad awareness and an improvement of your organization's capability to withstand. At the most technical, you're getting into basically preventative hacking or reactive hacking, forensics and incident response, where you really are going into lookup tables and managing port accesses and number of packets that went through of a certain type and whether or not that makes sense for that port in that time of day. Okay, so you're going from a very general discussion of, yeah, we want to be clean and safe and happy, all the way to, we see this problem or we see this breakdown in these packets going across these nodes at this time. Okay, and one can do this in a proactive way. We have not seen very much evidence of people who are doing proactive incident response. Okay. Do remind me, Omar, if I forget something really critical through here. Okay. So, as we go through, as we've gone through, we've been able to highlight a variety of different cut slices that the organizations make about whether or not they primarily configure as a NOC or as a SOC, whether or not they have different organizations, how big they are, and how much, if they do both, how much the NOC and SOC teams interact with each other. And by, I said, proactive and reactive actions, but they're also proactive and reactive standards regarding security about what do we set in place and what do we then respond to after it happens. Okay, and so we have collected, let me remind me about that when we get into methods, okay? So let's talk about some milestones to date on this project. I should point out that we started this project in February. Technically, we got approval to start in January, but our IRB approval finally came through while we were in San Francisco. So that was a curious thing of Omar sitting there at one of the breakout sessions. Can I talk to anybody yet? Can I talk to anybody yet? And then we checked the email and, yes, now you can talk to people. Because as a human subjects research study, we couldn't use any of the data that we might have collected before the IRB was approved. So if you're going to go through all the hassle to interview a senior tech lead in an operations center, you really want to know that you can use their data. And it was really fantastic, the variety of people that we got to talk to: financial, aviation, retail, critical infrastructure, power grid, manufacturing, power plants, military operations. So, so that was all part of our experience at the RSA conference. And so that's how we started collecting our first stages of interviews with both technical folks and I would say the managerial folks. And that's how we started getting access to this information about the gaps between what the managers would learn from their junior analysts and what they were then able to communicate to others in the organization. And I think the most sophisticated state-of-the-art tool that we heard being used for those managers was the pivot table in Excel. Yes. And so we got a number of contacts for future collaboration. As it turns out, this is a good thing because it was actually more than we could deal with at the time. And so we've continued to work with people over the summer and fall with a project strategy teleconference, and that we've been continuing this work through the summer to develop design guidelines for tools used in NOC and SOC environments. We've actually had to do an IRB modification because of the additional people that we've been able to talk to. And then we were able to, Omar visited the SOC of a major manufacturing company. I get to talk to my friends who work in manufacturing and production industries. We've also talked to people at organizations that you've interacted with. I should point out, let me go back, the third name here, Marlene Proman, is actually an MFA student, Master of Fine Arts in visual performance here at Purdue. And so she had already done some work in information visualization. And so we're really collaborating and drawing some additional benefit from her on different models of design thinking and how that can be brought into this. And in fact, this is actually one of Marlene's drawings, and it helps to show some of the issue points and some of the sources of tension. So as we were saying, you may have a junior analyst here, what we're calling a tier 1 analyst, that is using a very, very simple brute force incident monitoring tool. That only allows the analyst to make sense of well-defined, previously identified exploits or aberrations or anomalies. Let me just call it that way. So if that is well-defined and well understood, the tier 1 analyst can often respond to that incident themselves. Depending on the quality of the organization and the level of effort that they put into it, and that's one of the ways that we mean about proactive strategy. Okay, an incident that has not been resolved may be escalated to the more senior people, and depending on the quality of the organization, you may have a larger or smaller fraction of your incidents or your anomalies being escalated. So if this is something that the tier 2 analysts can resolve and they resolve it, one of the challenges then is how does that analyst then present that the quality of their performance to others in the organization. So either in terms of team status, okay, how well is my group of analysts doing, or company status. Here is the current business risk to the company. Okay, and that's a very different question than what is the probability of access to a particular set of nodes. Okay, they don't have a lot of tools to be able to communicate that business risk or that team capability. Okay. The other challenge then is that to the extent that a tier 2 analyst is spending all their time picking up the phone or having people come in to say, oh my goodness, I need you to help me with this, they don't actually have time to sit back and think more strategically about, oh, I just heard about one of these last week. We've started getting a bunch of these and they all seem to have some similar profiles. How do I get a tool that allows me to take those non-routine events that have gotten escalated and figure out if there's anything common to them and turn that into some routine capability that would then be allowed to get fed back into the tools that are available to the tier 1 analysts. Okay. If you can do that, you also have some additional capabilities of adding to the corporate intelligence, adding to the technology adoption, and then actually being able to go to white room knowledge sharing sessions from your experience and then build on that as well. Many people are just too busy putting out fires to actually go and get any benefit from those. So where we've been so far, we've been working on a number of different methods, pilot study and case study operations. And at this point, I'm going to bring Omar up to talk a little bit about where we are in the project, starting with the information visualization, because that's such a pretty picture.
Hi everyone. So I'll go back one slide here. So again, I don't want to repeat what Dr. Caldwell was going through. We did this pilot study at RSA with 8 different professionals, and as he said, with different backgrounds from education to banking and military operations. And then in summer, we did another case study in a manufacturing firm, security operations centers. I got a chance to shadow some of the, actually the whole team. So I did shadow 5 different people, 1 novice or junior analyst, 3 senior analysts, and their team lead and the manager of the whole department. I didn't get to shadow the manager, but I did one-on-one interviews with all 6 at the end of the shadowing period. So this is how I did some data collection for the coming results. So one concept I would like to give you some idea about is situation awareness. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that term or not. No, I see some heads shaking. So this is a concept that was developed actually by a Purdue graduate student, Dr. Ensley. This was in the mid-90s, and it's basically describing that in a specific environment, the ability to perceive the different elements of that environment and then to comprehend those elements into meaningful cues, then make necessary projections and resolutions to be able to make necessary decision making to manage that environment. So later in 2009, based on those, I'll have to use the mouse here. So these are the 4 levels I'm talking about when I define situation awareness. And this is how, in 2009, the same concept or the same methodology was applied to cybersecurity operations. So again, perception, comprehension, projection, and resolution. This was done late in 2009. So we're trying to apply these concepts and use this model to make sure that the tools that the analysts are using to manage and monitor their networks are actually adequate with these concepts. Okay. So again, I'm not going to go into details because I think Dr. Caldwell covered most of this, but one interesting finding that we found based on these data that we collected is the way the junior and senior analysts actually interact. So after going through systematic training or whatever education analysts go through, they still need to build a set of expertise to be able to perform their job into the network centers. And through that cycle, they do interact a lot with senior analysts and task escalation, as Dr. Caldwell mentioned. And then after a specific cycle, there's always this desire of escalating by junior analysts. They don't want to keep doing late shifts or 12-hour shifts, and they possess a different set of skills that they want to escalate into the organization. So this keeps having organizations a demand of continuous hiring of junior analysts. This cycle is usually between 9 months and 2 years. So based on this interaction, there's always an interruptive environment for the senior analysts from what they actually need to do, and to come down and help junior analysts on their tasks. So usually those type of tasks are non-routine in regards of the junior analyst. However, senior analysts, when they deal with this, it's usually they just keep fixing those errors and go back to whatever they need to do. And this misses the cycle of monitoring the frequent tasks and trying to make some documentation for future analysts that will be hired in that 2-year cycle to use these documentation instead of falling back in the same loop of just interrupting their work, the senior analyst work. So Dr. Caldwell had previous research in different domains in aviation and healthcare and how to make use of this cycle and how to document this knowledge and set of expertise. So we're trying also to build some tools to make use of that. So when this knowledge referencing cycle is missing, there are some benefits that the senior analysts actually get to interact more with their junior analysts and spread their expertise and be aware of what they're doing. However, the bad side would be mainly the interruptions. We were last week in the Human Factors conference in Chicago, as Dr. Caldwell mentioned, and there was a very interesting study that shows that continuous interruptions not only affect the productivity of the person you're interrupting, but also it has an effect of the quality of like the final output. No matter, even if you give the person more time, if there's no time restriction, it will never meet the actual quality of the output if you just have no interruptions. And definitely in SOC and NOC environments, there's no this luxury of endless time as well. So what we're trying to do at this point is getting more interviews to validate the findings that we have at this point. Also, to be able to perform some goal-directed task analysis. And the way the goal-directed task analysis is different than the traditional task analysis. It's trying to make a hierarchy or flow chart of the goals that need to be accomplished and the sub-goals. And not like how people should do things, but actually how they currently do it. And then also trying to capture the information needed for each goal and sub-goal and the situation awareness requirements to meet these goals. Also in progress, the design prototypes that Dr. Caldwell mentioned that Marlene is working on from the interaction design perspective. That's also in progress.
So let me
Sure.
mention a couple of other things, but don't go too far. Because one of the things that obviously as you go through a project and you're trying to figure out what have you gotten done and what is still left to be done. We've had a very interesting set of discussions. So one of the things that we decided after the great experience at RSA, what would happen if we actually presented on this at the RSA conference, not just because it's a great excuse to go to San Francisco in February, but there was so much interest from the community when we were there, and we hadn't even started doing the work yet. It's like, oh yeah, if you do something like that, we would be very interested. We would be very excited about a tool like that. That would be wonderful. So briefing the community on the progress, collecting additional data from people. And one of the things that we've had initial discussions about were the challenges, and some of you have probably thought about this. What's worse than failing at your project? The one thing that could be worse is being terrifically successful. And this idea of what we started calling going product, rather than turning this into a continual research stream. What happens if someone says, yes, we would like you to build this, or we would like you to build these interfaces that could sit on top of pick your favorite incident analysis tool or contextual representation tool. So we want to make sure that we are thinking about that very strategically. As Omar said, that just last week at the Human Factors Conference, there were a number of contacts because because there is a new set of interests in the human factors of cybersecurity. Everything from Air Force Research Lab had some presentations, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, some of the national labs had presentations and discussions. So we're seeing a very strong growth in the human factors elements of cybersecurity, not just at the screen of how do we design this big shared display, but beyond the screen, how do we improve the analyst's awareness of the state of the network from what we're showing to them on the screen. So there's a real difference between how many colors can you perceive and how much can you figure out normal operations, obviously bad operations, and some attacks, some degraded capabilities aren't necessarily obviously bad, but they can be just enough above or below nominal performance that they could be breadcrumbs, but there's actually not a very good understanding of how to present that sort of information right now. Every time I turn around, someone else has started talking to Omar about internships and projects, and I should feel glad about that. And I guess you should feel glad about that.
Sure.
But seriously, what has been your experience in interacting with people in this industry, and how has that changed your view towards your dissertation research?
So I think one of the most interesting conversation I had in terms of the internship settings was with a PhD alumni, also from Purdue, from here, and he's working in Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and his team is focusing on cybersecurity situation awareness, and he's looking at how information that is currently presented, as Dr. Caldwell mentioned, like a lot of numbers and characters, and how this is out of context, and the analyst needs to keep digging more information about every specific incident to make sure if this is just a false alarm or an actual threat. So this digging procedure is taking a lot of time, and it's not helping the analyst going from level 1 to level like 3 and 4 when we talked about situation awareness to the projection and resolution levels to be able to make the necessary decisions or fixations in timely manner. So how to present this information in context first, how to isolate the relevant information from false alarms, and how to present it in the correct context, and how to increase automation in this sense to help the essay of the analyst. That's what mainly his team is working on.
And let me add in on something, because that issue about automation and automated decision tools is a very popular approach that a lot of people in AI and reasoning are going into. When you think about it, that actually, although it sounds like it's taking humans out of the loop and making them less vulnerable, it's actually separating the decision cycle from the action cycle of the operations center. And so if you, wonderful people, I know you would never do this, but imagine a lesser security software designer decides to create a particular set of tools that highlights a particular type of situation as an exploit. But if that's not responsive to the organizational context and it generates lots and lots of false alarms, what's the most likely response that the analyst will do? Yes, they'll turn it off, which obviously does not help you in your awareness of the current state of the operations center. So one real concern that we're having, and I'm not giving this part of the project to Omar because he's got enough dissertations and you only need one. But another one of my students is very interested in the question of how do we trust a big data analytic tool, and how do we make sense of the decision outcome that's being suggested by some hidden layer model that we don't understand and can't effectively query what its utility functions were, what its criteria were. Does that even make sense for us to use to make critical decisions about whether or not do we turn off that port today? Okay, do we shut down that server? So one of the real questions that this research is starting to uncover is how do we make sense and how do we use automation effectively in partnership with analysts for very, very high event rate situations. So I think we have one more slide or two. Yes, one more outstanding, two more.
I would just jump to the outputs because I want to open some room for questions and we only have 10 minutes left. So projected outputs is improving the usability of those displays and tools that we're talking about. Task capturing for documentation and knowledge referencing. Improving the communication between different analysts and different professionals in this environment. These are what we're looking at, and also one last thing I forgot to mention when I talked about the goal-directed task analysis is we actually plan to do the two different task analysis for senior and novice analysts, and to be able to compare and see how they overlap and what kind of goals they think they're both responsible of and how to improve this collaboration. That's my last comment. So I'll just open it for questions in those last 10 minutes.
So,
thank you very
that's
much.
what we have. Thank you for coming up in such short notice. Thank you. Any questions? If it's really hard, I'll make Omar answer. Yes.
So some organizations, especially governments, like to silo information such that subgroups don't necessarily share all the information to include like network attack information. Have you looked into how this effect on analysts not being able to access all the available information might negatively or positively affect their job performance?
Yeah, actually we have had some of those discussions, and without going into much detail for some obvious reasons. One of the challenges seems to be how do you structure a lessons learned environment so that you can share common elements that don't highlight project-specific or activity-specific information, but you can share more general patterns in a less restricted way. This is both organizationally and technically difficult for some groups to work with. So we are trying to figure out what does a lessons learned repository look like. I'm not aware of anybody who's done a very thorough job of that in the cyber operations world. So I'm not quite sure how far we are away from that, but it is a discussion that we've started to have. Yes.
Make sure this works. It seems to me that part of the challenge that these NOCs and SOCs have is they're very IT-centric. The impact of their success or failure impacts the corporation or institution as a whole. I'm wondering if you're seeing limitations to what they do predicated upon who they report to. And maybe folks should say, you know, really this should be a direct report to operations, because there might be decisions like, you know, maybe we should quit taking credit cards from this part of the world until that issue is resolved. And that's a serious business decision.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about some of the interview discussions you had with the famous pivot table tool?
Yeah, there's something very similar to what you're saying is when I went to this manufacturing SOC, they talk about like people in actual manufacturing settings and how engineers just decide on buying new tools that makes the system more vulnerable, and then the SOC team or the security team is aware of this after the actual purchase happened. So this miscommunications puts a lot of load on the SOC team trying to secure this new environment or this new technology that they're trying to implement. and it would have been much better to like know in advance. Maybe they can like make previous assessments or feasibility studies on how maybe the other technology is better and it's doing the same set of tasks that they need. I think that's like so. Reporting, I think, back and forth is also there's a very weak link in that perspective. Yes.
And I would say conversely, as you said, a lot of these SOC teams are very IT centric, so they have trouble translating what they do into a business case. So why this is worth a certain amount of the organization's after-tax revenue.
There was a Dr. Pandiman that spoke here, and with the help of IBM and their large clients around the world, collected a lot of cost accounting information on the consequences of different breaches and different types. Now, whether they can actually translate that in some form or fashion to a competitive advantage, if it's done well, would be a line of thought.
I'd like to see that reference, because I think that could help some of our tool design. But I don't recall anybody that we talked to actively being aware of that sort of business case.
Again, they're very IT-centric.
Yes.
So in the spirit of lessons learned and not being a clear depository of information that can be shared, is there a place where organizations can look for intelligence to move into that proactive stance versus being introspective?
I feel like you've just handed me this juicy little thing, because ideally, I think a nonpartisan, unbiased research and education facility would be excellent for that. And if one just happened to exist in a visible and well-recognized university with a visionary leader, that could. Hey, it's serious. Yes, yes, it is. I admit that's what we do. And that would be an exceptionally powerful capability. And it's kind of like the way the semiconductor industry used the universities to project capabilities for technology development. Any other questions? So are we supposed to just start singing or telling jokes for the next 130 seconds? But no, thank you for attending. Again, if you have ideas or conversations or experiences or access to a center that you would be willing to share with us, that would be very, very helpful. We are trying to figure out what our next steps will be, not just oh yeah, further research is necessary, but there are at least 3 or 4 interesting directions that this project could take. And do you want to close out with any mention of where you see this going for your dissertation and beyond?
Say again one more time.
Do you want to be my grad student forever? And if not,
I mean, it's pleasure working with you, but no, not forever. No.
So what happens next?
Maybe a prelim this semester.
No. After the graduation, what does this dissertation do for you? What does this research
I think
open up?
It opens new field for me, like working in IT. I didn't think of this. Working like in information security from an industrial engineering degree is kind of different and new, so very exciting. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
So, thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Good luck with the rest of the semester.
Thanks.
Just enjoy putting.